Welcome to Practical Home Projects. We learned a lot of valuable things when we were doing our kitchen renovations. We want to share some of those grouting tips with you guys today. The first part of the grout selection process is to pick either sanded or unsanded grout. Sanded grout is usually used in flooring with bigger gaps because that aggregate can actually make the grout a lot more durable and it will shrink less. However, we're going to go with unsanded grout because we're going to have those smaller gaps and it'll adhere better to our wall. There are three broad types of grout. There's cement grout, ready-to-use grout, and epoxy grout. Cement grout is the cheapest type. It's basically just a dry bag of Portland cement that you mix in with water, and it's commonly used in flooring and exterior applications. Epoxy grout is a premium type of grout because it is very durable and flexible. So this can be used in many different types of applications. So you'll buy two different components and those will combine to make a chemical hardener. Now you're going to need special tools and cleaning processes to use this one. Ready-to-use grout is sort of a hybrid of the other two because it's a cement base but it has a polymer reinforcement. We're actually going to use this one because it's really easy to apply and there's no sealing required, so it's low maintenance. There are a few different geometries of grout float that you can use in your project. The standard grout float is rectangular in shape and is good for wide open areas. You can also get a pointed styled grout float that's good for tucking into corners. I just used a margin float, which is good for kind of getting into small spaces. There's also a special type of rubber that's necessary for epoxy, so if you're using epoxy grout, make sure to use that special rubber float. Applying grout is one of the last steps you're going to do in your kitchen process, which means that you have all of these beautiful finished surfaces, the walls, the cabinets, the countertops around it. So you're going to want to protect all of those surfaces. I always apply painter's tape around the edges on the walls and the cabinets, and then go ahead and apply a thick sheet of cardboard across your countertops. Just using newspaper or a plastic bag is usually not nearly sturdy enough because this grout's going to stick to it, it's going to tear, it's not going to be enough. So I think you'll really appreciate having something sturdy like a cardboard, and then you can just throw it away when you're done. Before applying the grout, take a look at the space between each tile to see if any of the mastic or the adhesive is poking out. If it is, use a utility blade to scrape that out to the best of your ability. That will allow the grout to fully set into that channel. When applying the grout, work with about a 2 foot by 2 foot section so that it doesn't dry out. And then I like to apply it diagonally. That way you're not just dragging it through any of those channels and you're able to sort of press into each of the spaces between the tiles. And I also like to hold that grout float at about a 45-degree angle. I find that's the best combination of pressing it down into those gaps as well as scraping it off the surface of the tiles. If you're using a beveled tile like us, you'll notice that the grout float can't remove the grout from that beveled area. I just went ahead and used my finger to scrape that out so that I would get a nice crisp line. As soon as possible after you scraped that grout off with the grout float, you're going to want to scrub the surfaces of the tile. So prepare a clean bucket of water as well as a sponge ahead of time so that you can scrub the surfaces of those tiles. Be careful not to gouge into those grout lines because then that will show up later. And then change out that bucket of water as often as possible. That way it'll leave less haze on the surface and make your job a little bit easier. Most instructions say to wait about an hour to let the grout set up before attempting to remove the haze. So with this, you're going to get a clean rag and a clean bucket of water and just buff those tiles because there was a little bit of a waxy residue left over from the grout, and buff the tiles as clean as you can just with the clean water. If that's not working, you can also use isopropyl alcohol or a cleaning chemical. Just be careful not to interfere with the grout itself. The next step is to apply caulk in the seams. So we use grout up here between the tiles, and now we're going to use a caulk when we have our tiles to our countertop, as well as the tile to the tile 90-degree angle in the back. It's important to use caulk instead of grout in those instances because those surfaces are going to move slightly over time, and then your mortar is going to crack, and that kind of defeats the whole purpose because this seam is designed to prevent moisture from getting back behind your cabinets. We're going to use a pretty generic silicone caulk from GE. You definitely want to use silicone instead of the latex because this is going to be much more waterproof. You can get specialty colored ones if you want to match your grout or anything else. This one's pretty cheap and it just comes in white or clear. Typically I slice the tip of my caulk tube off with a box cutter, but I actually noticed that there's a little attachment here on the handle of my caulking gun that allows you to cut the tip off if you don't have a knife handy. I applied painter's tape very carefully before applying the caulk because silicone caulk is very messy. And then also when I'm using the caulking gun, I apply just enough caulk because I don't want a big gob that's going to be difficult to clean up later. Just like with regular caulk, with silicone caulk, you're going to use your finger to press it along that groove all the way down so that it's nice and even. And it helps to keep your finger wet. That way the surface is nice and smooth instead of having a sort of texture to it. And I always have a paper towel nearby to wipe my finger off as I go along.